Welcome, from Alpha to Omega.
Hello and welcome to the 86th episode of From Alpha to Omega. Today is Sunday, the 24th of June 2018, and I'm your host, Tom O'Brien. This week we have part 2 of our discussion with show stalwart Professor Andrew Kliman about the Communist Manifesto. This episode I have the new Patreon subscribers Devin G and Senan K to thank, along with, of course, all the existing and loyal monthly subscribers. You too can donate to help keep the show going by hitting on that there PayPal button or signing up over on Patreon. If you want to leave a comment, please do it on the YouTube channel. And if you are listening on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button and give the episode a thumbs up. I'll also be appearing on a couple of upcoming episodes of the Swampside Chats podcast. Check it out. It's the goddamn best commie podcast out there. Now, to the interview. What do you make of the proletariat today? Are they the weakest they've been since Marx's time?
I wouldn't describe weakness as the problem. Rather, the problem. It's what I said before. In my view, this is the problem: is that these attempts to move forward. You know, whether people explicitly call themselves revolutionary or not is neither here nor there in my book. The question is, you know, where are their concerns going? Where are their rebellions going? You know, their direction. But the problem is the impediments to the ongoing development. You know, so things are moving in a direction, but it doesn't get the time to develop.
Like, you're talking about these things that come in and they stymie this development. Like, who exactly do you think is doing that? Like, names and names.
Look, the trade union bureaucracy comes in. There's a wildcat strike, okay? The trade union bureaucracy comes in and says, no, look, we got a contract. You can't do this. I mean, how many times has that happened? I mean, in the 1970s in this country, in heavy industry, it was like a daily occurrence, probably in, multiple places. That's just one, for instance. You know, there are just numerous ones where, like in Europe, do you have, socialists and communists and whatever you want to call people, who are saying, the workers have to, run their own organizations instead of us building a party to draw them into what we want and we lead them, or we represent their interests. Those things are not there, so they're not getting any assistance, and they're getting things that disempower them rather than empower them. So I don't even need to name names. It's just like this is our everyday experience. We see it all around us. It's just when you look at it from a different perspective, it looks different from how it's usually portrayed.
Yeah, I have a book. I think it's quite a famous book. I've yet to read it. It's on my shelf, but it's called, I don't know, you've probably heard about it. It's called maybe you've heard about it, The Intellectual Life of the British Working Classes. Have you heard of this?
Is that E.P. Thompson?
No, this is a fellow called Jonathan Rose.
I may or may not be familiar with it. I certainly haven't read it. But yeah, it doesn't really ring a bell.
Yeah, no, it basically talks about like how the British working classes self-educated, all through this period, probably the 1800s and 1900s. It shows what they were learning and the type of books and the intellectual books they were reading, as opposed to how people think now about how working class people are dumb, not able to educate themselves. It's a very different idea that it used to exist of what the working class could do, that I think today, certainly the people that are college educated and that look down on working class people, and quite frankly, a lot of times, culturally in the colleges, it's like a training in how to be elitist. I certainly felt that I was guilty of that when I left college.
Well, I agree with you, but I didn't quite understand the end. You thought that you were guilty of...
Guilty of, you're kind of inculcated to think that, everybody's stupid, we're really smart.
Right, and you think you picked that up in college?
Yes, definitely, yeah.
Uh-huh. And do you come from a working class background?
From farming stock.
So you don't come from the professional...
From farming.
Yeah, you don't come from the professional section, Right. See, I think most middle class people, sort of just grow up with this, so they're kind of like their instinctive way of being is elitist. But other people can pick it up.
I suppose, middle class in England definitely would have more of that. Like in Ireland, certainly where I grew up, the structure was quite flat. Rural Ireland, you would have mixing between, say, different classes a lot more so than in, say, urban areas, I would reckon. I definitely noticed that in myself. Certainly after reading Marx and getting into radical politics, you look back at some of the things you would have thinking, you would see how it was inculcated in education to have those attitudes towards the working class and what they are able to do or not able to do. So we had this deal between essentially the capitalists and the working class for a good wage and a social welfare and safety net when there was a large organised working class to do it. And also when we had revolutions in Russia and in Eastern Europe and China, that there was a big pressure on the capitalist class to give their workers a good deal so they would, say, not be so revolutionary. We don't have that anymore. There's essentially no real left alternative. Should we expect to see some more of these immiseration tendencies become stronger and stronger? Should we see these dynamics that Marx was talking about that, say, got dampened by some of the realities of, say, 20th century geopolitics and politics? Are we likely to see more immiseration and a more trend towards the radicalization of the proletariat over the coming decades?
And by I can't even say that word, immiseration? You mean the decline in living standards?
Yeah, or the ability to buy a house, for example. People have to rent. They don't like their landlords. Their hours are going up. Like as a part of, this idea of the falling rate of profit and things like this. Right.
This all depends on the rhythms of the cyclical economy. By the way, I don't and never have agreed with this idea of a capital labor accord in the early post-war period that you were invoking. But I mean, if there was such an accord, let me see the paper in which it was written, and it's a talking point of certain people. But what will happen? I don't think we can know. I don't think that there is a particular direction. Certainly, there's nothing that's necessary, But even in terms of likelihood, I don't know. Living standards on the whole, in absolute terms, have been going up, in the third world where they have the most to go up. And this has been for decades and decades now, and they've risen under neoliberalism in the U.S., not at the same rate as before, but it's not because of neoliberalism really, it's because of a much slower growth of the economy. I don't think that there's any necessary direction, and I don't think it's even necessarily cyclical. What happens, and I wouldn't try to predict it. But beyond predicting, what I look at is what are the economic laws and tendencies that pull us in one direction or another. I just don't think there is any such a thing that is moving us in one direction or another here.
So you're of the opinion that this idea of the falling rate of profit that does cause crises, that if the system is being managed in such a way as to, say, not allow a large crisis to clean it out and regain profitability, do you not see the tendency say, of the politics to be a function of this rate of profit?
Okay. Right. I mean, the tendency of the rate of profit to fall is a real tendency, and it is a contributory factor towards, economic crisis tendencies. That much I agree with, and that's an ever-present tendency. But now you're okay. So you're adding in the ability of capitalism to recover from these crises. I mean, to the extent that they don't do a real, purging of the economy, and they tend to hold things together. Yeah, you get weaker growth over the long periods, and that has an effect on slowing down, growth in living conditions. I agree with that. Is that like necessary? It's not economically necessary that you get this desire to keep everything together instead of having a major crash that would, sort of allow for a new boom. There might be political factors that you would say push in that direction, for sure. But, to try to talk about political decisions in the same way that we talk about economic laws, it doesn't, something about it seems wrong to me, because it's apples and oranges. So, I mean, I agree with you. There has been that tendency. I think it's largely responsible for sluggish growth for decades, this tendency to try to hold things together and to prevent a major crash. Yeah, that tends to retard growth, which tends to retard the growth of living standards, and could to some extent retard, could put a stop to increasing living standards. But I don't want to make any predictions here. It doesn't seem to me that this is necessary, and in some sense we know it's not. Okay, in some sense we know that, we could have a major crash that wipes out everything. So something like the Great Depression in the U.S., because that's where it was the deepest, or even worse. There's nothing really to prevent that.
I suppose what I'm trying to pull some strings at is just some of the tendencies that I see in, say, the current political economic situation. Say, for example, the idea, the tendency in practically every country in the West to increase indebtedness of people, to offer more credit for people to be able to buy houses, more multiples of their salaries, and thus causing the house prices to rise. This kind of tendency of the system at the moment to do this for many reasons, linked to probably the falling rate of profit and just the capitalist tendencies in the system at the moment, leading to this idea of, the proletariat getting extremely annoyed with how things are working. It seems to me that we can see developing, which was going to create, say, a more radical element of the proletariat than, say, 15, 20 years ago, when that dynamic didn't exist to the same extent. That dynamic being indebtedness. Yeah, as if, the average house price in most countries was not as high as a function of wages. The level of indebtedness has been rising. Private debt has risen, I think, across the board, across probably every OECD country over the last, 40 years? In most European countries, it's, I think, doubled the private debt. Right. Yeah, I mean, I think this is largely, and I'm as close to certain as I can be about anything. In the U.S., it had everything to do with the slowdown in growth that we've seen, after the first 20, 25 years of the post-war boom. So the government continually papered over problems and kicked the can down the road by covering over bad debt with more debt. Then we see the Great Recession. Well, private debt as well. Right. So it's government debt, but also government policies that encouraged the buildup of private debt. Yeah. So, in the United States, it's just a scandal
and it had everything to do with the Great Recession, how they let the loan-to-value ratios, go up, which is what you're referring to. How many? It's essentially the same thing. How many multiples of? The loan-to-value ratio is the value of the home is $200,000, and you borrow $190,000. So that's a loan-to-value ratio of 190 to 200,000, 95%. You still can't do that in this country legally, I don't think. But they kept going up and up and up. That had everything to do with the Great Recession. So probably that's happening elsewhere. I haven't seen the statistics, but I don't doubt what you're saying. Yeah, I'm a little bit losing the question, but this is one of the things that they learned from the Great Depression. Is you can keep things going for a while, with debt expansion. From the standpoint of the capitalists and the immediate interests of people, you would rather have that than have the whole thing unravel and be plunged into a deep depression.
I think Marx and Engels came out at one stage and said, I think certainly about Holland and maybe another country, that they saw there might be the chance of a parliamentary route to communism. This seems to go kind of at odds with what's in the manifesto.
Right. Well, first of all, when they write the manifesto, this is in the days before, even universal suffrage for men, even universal suffrage for white men, right? There's that. I think what I know what you're referring to, and I believe it to have been a commentary on something or other, a response on something or other by Engels after Marx had died, and he said, we, myself and Marx, used to, kick this around, this idea, we would speculate on this. It's interesting because Marx became much more revolutionary. His concept of revolution deepened, in particular after the Paris Commune. Like I read you that thing before from the preface or whatever to the 1872 German edition of the Manifesto. That's the year after the Paris Commune, and he quotes, "The working class cannot simply lay hold of the ready-made state machinery and wield it for its own purposes. That doesn't exactly preclude a parliamentary road to the gaining of state power. It doesn't fit that easily with it. So, I mean, I don't know what period, Engels was saying that he and Marx kicked this around. I'm not even 100% it's accurate. It's certainly possible. And if I remember, Engels said, we're talking about particular places and times. I think, he mentioned the Netherlands, like you said, and the United States as possibilities there. I mean, I don't preclude that. I'm much more concerned that, we're not going to have a liberal democracy in the United States if we keep going the way we're going. It might be very, very soon before our rights are taken away. That's my immediate concern. But so it's in the entirely opposite direction. That's fundamentally not the key issue when we come to social revolution. So, I wouldn't say that means that Marx, if he says, okay, look, it might be possible, to come to power in a political sense by parliamentary means, that's neither here nor there, really, in terms of, the perspective of social revolution. Because the social revolution is not a matter of different people, taking political power. It's a matter of changing economic and social conditions.
Fair enough. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about before we finish up?
Well, you sent me a list of questions that you might ask. One thing I thought was really interesting was that there's this, when I was saying, why is the manifesto so popular? Why does it have primacy of place? Well, people read it because it's short, and they get assigned in college or whatever because it's short. And another thing that happens is, the professors say, you only need to read the first two parts. You don't need to read the third part and fourth part at the end. So, you're down to 7,000 words in the first two parts. But there's this longish third part. And, that's interesting because you asked me, like, does this have any relevance? And what that third part does is to compare, contrast, and situate the perspective of the Communist League with respect to other tendencies and currents that call themselves socialists. And a lot of the stuff was, things of the time that I read what the description is, and I'm like, I don't even know what the hell they're talking about. But they must have, right? People at the time must have gotten the references. They're just kind of vague to me. But some of the tendencies there, we still have, or they've come back. Marx mentions Proudhon, which was a big problem in his time. Proudhonism and similar stuff to Proudhonism, has become very, very popular on the left in recent years.
Like what?
Well, Proudhonism is basically, once I describe it to you, you'll know what. I won't have to name particulars. Proudhonism is basically a way of saying, let's change the nature of capitalism by changing exchange, by changes in the monetary system, and by changing the laws that regulate exchange more generally. So it's partly monetary reform, and it's partly trying to change the nature of capitalism by tinkering with mode of exchange. In other words, to be specific, Proudhon was saying, what happens is people do an hour of work, this one does an hour of work, that one does an hour of work, the other one does an hour of work. But, when it winds up in exchange, they don't get equal compensation. And he attributed that to exchange. And Marx, engages in a long polemic in 1847, The Poverty of Philosophy. He spends decades, on this question. It's there. The monetary issue is there in the Grundrisse, which is preparatory to the writing of Capital. It's all there in Capital as well. And then Marx is saying this is not a question of exchange. This is a question of the mode of production. So all these problems, these defects, these social ills are rooted in the system of production and
exploitation.
Yes, it's exploitation of the worker, but even more fundamentally, it's the fact that labor under capitalism is not directly social. Okay, so that's a big issue, is the indirect sociality of labor. And associated with that, it's that labor time has to be socially necessary to count as creating value. And different acts of labor, an hour of one person's labor and an hour of another person's labor, they're not equally hours of socially necessary labor. Right? There are people who are more productive, less productive, working with more advanced means of production, less advanced means of production, and so forth. And their hours of labor don't count equally, and that is not a matter of exchange. That is the operation of the law of value. So it's not like, these people are getting ripped off in the market. It's not that. It's that this is a system in which productivity differences count. That's not being ripped off in the market.
Yeah, you're being compared to an average worker with your labor.
Yeah. That's a way of putting it. Okay, and that's not a market phenomenon. So messing with the market doesn't change this. And Marx, is at pains already in 1847, maybe even before. But when he writes The Poverty of Philosophy, he's at pains to explain this difference and to say you can't just get rid of money. And you can't just get rid of exchange. You have to get rid of commodities, and this requires getting rid of commodity production, which requires getting rid of value and value relations that dominate. So he goes all the way down. He drills down to the really bedrock conditions that are causing this. And in Capital, which you've read, there's a couple of references to people like Proudhon. What they're doing is, I wish I had the exact reference, because I'm going to say it, and it's really funny, but I'll screw it up because I don't have the reference exactly in mind. But it's something like, he wants to abolish Catholicism by getting rid of the Pope. You remember this?
I do, yeah.
Okay.
I remember, and I didn't understand that quote when I read it.
Okay, this is it. The Pope is the privileged status of money. So you say, okay, it's not just gold and silver that are money. Every commodity is money. That was a Proudhonist idea. And the privileging of gold and silver. And Marx is like, yeah, what good is that going to do? Right? You're going to have a different pope. You get rid of the one pope, you get a different pope. So that's the reference to the pope, because the references are specifically in the context of money, and in that really, that section 3 of chapter 1 of volume 1 of Capital, on the form of value, or the forms of value, that people find like really hard and like, what the hell is he doing here? The whole thing is a response to Proudhon, and Marx is trying to demonstrate dialectically how money arises from this simple relation of two commodities. Okay? It arises on that basis. Okay? In some sense, maybe it's not logically necessary, but it's materially bound up with and inextricable. Money is from this relation of commodities. Okay? So you get rid of just the money, or you change the nature of money, the same thing is going to reappear in some different form. Okay? And as long as you have commodities, something like this has to arise. That's what he's trying to argue here. And it's right at the end of this that he makes the Pope reference. That kind of like, you focus on that, you go, oh, okay, that's what this is all really going towards. Because you look at that, that's kind of like a summary of that whole section. Oh, okay, yeah. You can't keep Catholicism intact and get rid of the Pope. That's what Catholicism is. Catholicism is hierarchical. You keep commodity production, you're going to get all the rest of this stuff, right? So those tendencies are around us all the time. So like I said, there's been like this resurgence of sort of a neo-Proudhonism, the idea of trying to like tinker with the monastery system and fix capitalism by changing relations of exchange.
Also, he goes into some of the utopian projects, which he thinks they're kind of reactionary in the end. Right.
He said, look, the way I understand that is, he said, these things were like good in their time, because they pointed a way forward when the proletariat was immature. But the people who keep insisting on them, and especially people who want to like insist that you do it our way, they're like, this is like contrary to the self-developing working class and its revolutionary tendencies. If you're putting your stuff out as like, this is the alternative and everybody's got to follow it, and you're not even relating to the working class, but you're putting out these ideas in the abstract. So, at a certain moment, these people, kind of outlived their historic usefulness, and they didn't get with the ongoing forward movement of actual people on the ground to free themselves.
Yeah, like they reminded me, some of them, like I know there's a movement in like agriculture at the moment called Permaculture. I don't know if you've read up about it at all.
I have, but I don't really know much.
It's quite interesting actually, because they have like this very systemic approach to agriculture, as in it would be very much a kind of a dialectical one where it's not monocrop, it's the exact opposite, and it's science led, and it's treating the whole thing as a system and a system of design. When you read it, you kind of go, oh, Marx would probably like a lot of, the thinking behind it. But the thing is, in the end, the idea is like, you get your farm and you do your bit to heal the earth or whatever, and you share the surplus. They have this bit on the edge, it's called share the surplus. But in reality, what it is it's kind of people who have the money to buy a farm, do some kind of organic farming or something, and they usually don't share the surplus, and it's just a very middle class kind of retreat to the farm kind of idea. People don't like the nitty gritty of actually revolutionary organization. They think that you can just go and do it on your own.
Right. Well,
Pretty close to the hippie kind of
I
idea.
grew
Of
up.
retreat to the farm.
I kind of grew up in an environment in the United States where that was the thing. Late 60s, especially early 70s. That was like the thing. It doesn't surprise me that it's still around.
Yeah, like I found the stuff on the family and on a bit on women in there that was very strong and radical. Even today, reading it, it felt very radical.
Oh yeah, yeah. I certainly agree with you there. And one can talk about proletariat and capitalism and all of this. But if you really want to understand what's driving Marx in the manifesto, beyond the particulars, read that stuff on the family and women very, very carefully, because that goes to Marx's broader perspectives of human liberation, and you don't get his thinking so much confused with that of social democrats and stuff when you read it that way. You can see that what he's talking about is a real change in human relations. That's the real aim that he's working towards. So it's not the so-called 10-point program or whatever. That's the and I said he said that's kind of antiquated already by 1872. But that was never the real aim anyway. The real aim is an association in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. Okay, we should have talked about that really, because that's like how what is it? The second section ends. That's like the real deal. What they were really striving for.
On this episode, you heard the theme tune The Order of the Pharaonic Jesters by Sun Ra and his orchestra, and Anton Karas with the theme tune From the Third Man. Thanks for listening, and I hope you join me for the next episode of From Alpha to Omega.